In this video, I want to talk about a new table, a new analytics table that came out in ROC version 12.5 that has to do with giving units. This table is pretty easy to use, and it can dramatically improve the speed of your giving queries. So let's take a quick look. First, just a quick disclaimer, there could be some syntactical issues. We try not to do that. Do our best, but occasionally one can happen. So this is our tongue-in-cheek way of just saying sorry if that does happen. Let's first look at the result set that we're trying to achieve here. Now, if you know about giving within ROC, you know that a gift can apply to a person, or a person can configure their giving to say, hey, I want my gifts to be rolled up at the family level. When you give as a person, your giving ID will start with the letter P and have the person ID after it. When you give as a family, it'll start with the letter G, that's for group, because remember families are groups. And then the integer after that, the number after that is the group ID. So having to split this as you process the query can be very slow. So in this case, we just want to get the total giving of all time. And of all the years that we have data for, we want to give the total giving of that. Then we want the family title. This is where it gets slow, because now we have to kind of consider this and say, hey, if it's a G, then I need to come over here and say, well, I need all the adults in the family. If it's a P, I just need to get the person's name. So that's kind of that procedural logic that has to be inside your query, which is really slow. In some cases, like this G only returns Frank Dexter because he is the only adult in that family. Also, it's also helpful to have the person ID of the head of house. This is useful if you want to send, say, an email to just one person in the family versus all the adults. A lot of times you want to have this. And these two fields are the troublemakers. They're slow. Now, in the past, in 12.5, you've been able to use these functions which come inside of ROC. And so the way these functions work is just saying, hey, this function gets you the family title from the giving ID. So you just pass it in the giving ID. It'll return you the family title. Pretty cool. There's another function that does a similar thing with for the head of house, just providing the giving ID. So these are really easy to use, but they're very, very slow. And if you're doing it on a one person, not a big deal. You probably won't see a difference. It'll be super fast. You run this over a large set of data, and it's going to come to a grinding halt. So if we look at some real world data here, so we're comparing two different sized churches. The first church is, maybe we classify that as a medium sized church, 3,000 average weekend attendance. They do have 32,000 givers, which is quite a few for a 3,000 person church. So they probably have a lot of historical data that they've brought back and been running this for years. So that's interesting. They might have a lot of people giving individually. In fact, maybe they imported their data, and when they imported the data, maybe it was not grouped by person or by family. It was by person. That might explain that. Kind of a unique, interesting number there. But if I run that query I just showed you without the functions, so I commented out those two lines, it returns in 2.2 seconds. Not fast, not slow, but you can probably live with that. If you put those functions in, however, 27 seconds, which is completely out of the question. That's not usable. Now, if we run this on a larger size church, maybe one with 12,000 in average weekend attendance, they have 61,000 givers in their data set. It actually returns in 1.3 seconds without the functions. So obviously their database is quite large, but that large database does not even come close to helping when you add those functions. Okay, so now it's 134 seconds. So at that point, unusable. So what's another way around this? Well, if we drop out those two functions, we could instead, I'm doing a subquery here where I get the same data, and now I'm going to sum it, and I'm joining that to this new table. It's called Analytics Source Giving Unit, and I'm just going to link, it has a field called Giving ID. I'm going to link that to the giving ID of the person who did the transaction, okay, just much like we've done in the past. So I'm just going to join to this table, and I'm going to order by giving ID. And when I do this, I get the exact same data back, okay? So the data set looks exactly the same. But this time, if we look at the results, we can get what used to take 27 seconds, we can now get in 5.2 seconds. And on the large size church, what used to take 134 seconds, we can do in 1.7. Okay, and that's just going to go back to this query real quick, go back a slide here. We're just joining to this new table on giving ID. So I've chosen to do this in a subselect. You could do this in lots of different ways. You don't have to do the subselect. But just know that this table does exist and it's there. Quick note, by default, that table is not being populated unless you run the analytics job in Rock. Okay, so you got to run that. That will hydrate up that table with all the data and keep it up to date, and you can link to it. Okay, so super fast, very performant way of doing this. Let's look to see what else is on that table. So as I've noted, we looked at the giving ID. We looked at the giving leader person ID. Then we have the giving salutation. We have another one called giving salutation full, which would have all the kids involved. And then the rest of these all have to do with some of the new giving analytics features in version 13. So we'll be able to get their bin, their percentile, the amount median that they give, the amount IQR, the frequency mean, the frequency standard deviation, percent of gifts scheduled. So a lot of other analytics information that are in here, which is really cool. So that can be very helpful too as you're starting to segment out your queries based on some of this information. If we hadn't put it in here, again, it would have been kind of difficult because you'd have to go look at person attributes, which is where that stuff is stored, but we've put it all in here. So hopefully you've seen that this new pattern is so much faster than the old way. You're just going to do circles around those functions. And I would highly recommend you just ignore those functions, pretend they don't exist. I don't think the core will get rid of those because some people are using them and we don't want to break other people's SQL, I'm sure. So just realize this new table is your ticket to speed.